family reconciliation after years of separation, a heartwarming mother-daughter journey. Welcome to Stories TH. In today's emotional story, we explore the heart-wrenching journey of family reconciliation after years of silence. Watch as a mother and daughter finally reconnect, overcoming years of pain and misunderstanding. If you believe in the power of family reconciliation, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of healing and hope. The unexpected invitation for Sarah. Life had been full of long silences, broken promises, and unresolved pain. The past 30 years had created an unbridgeable gap between her and her daughter Lily, a gap wide enough to keep them apart even as the years passed. Sarah had spent most of her life trying to piece together the fragments of her family after a painful divorce, and Lily, her only child, had been swept away by her father's lies. Richard, Sarah's ex-husband, had done everything in his power to erase her from their daughter's life, convincing Lily that her mother had abandoned them both. Over time, Sarah had accepted the painful truth that she might never be able to rebuild her relationship with Lily. But then, one fateful day, everything changed. It all started on an ordinary afternoon. Sarah was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping her lukewarm coffee, her mind wandering to the last few months of her life. Diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, she had been given a prognosis of 6 months to live. The doctors had offered aggressive treatments, but Sarah knew in her heart that the end was near. The thought of dying alone, with no reconciliation, weighed heavily on her mind. She had spent years accepting the empty space in her life where Lily should have been, but now, as she approached her final days, she began to wonder, was there still time to fix things? Was there a chance for closure before it was all over? As she turned the page of a book she had been reading, her gaze fell on the pile of unopened mail that had accumulated over the week. The letters, the bills, and the usual assortment of ads sat on the corner of her kitchen counter, ignored for days. But something caught her eye: a cream-colored envelope with elegant handwriting on the front. Her name, Sarah Richardson, was written in neat script, but something about it felt off. The writing looked familiar, almost hauntingly so, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she hesitated to open it. With trembling hands, she ripped open the envelope, revealing a wedding invitation. At first glance, she was filled with disbelief. The invitation was for Lily's wedding. Sarah's eyes scanned the words, and she could hardly believe what she was seeing. Lily Richardson and James Brennan request the honor of your presence at their wedding, to be held at Willow Creek Vineyard on September 15th. There it was, the invitation she had never expected. After 30 years of silence, the daughter she had loved and raised was reaching out in the most formal way possible. A wedding invitation. No note, no explanation, just the invitation. Tears blurred her vision as she read it over and over again. Why now? Why after all these years? Why after everything that had happened between them? Was this some kind of cruel joke or a last-minute attempt to fulfill some societal obligation? Was Lily just fulfilling some ritual, or was there truly a chance for something more? Sarah sank into her chair, the weight of the invitation pressing down on her chest. The question echoed in her mind. Why now? Why had Lily chosen this moment to invite her to the most important day of her life, knowing full well the years of silence and pain between them? It felt surreal, and yet, Sarah couldn't ignore the flicker of hope that ignited deep within her heart. This was an opportunity to heal old wounds, to finally have the conversation they never had. But the bitter reality was that time was running out. Her terminal illness loomed over her like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the glimmer of hope that the invitation brought. In a way, the invitation felt like a miracle. After all, how often do we get second chances to make things right? Sarah had made peace with her past. She had learned to live with the absence of her daughter. But with the reality of her illness, she began to wonder if this was her final chance to fix what had been broken, to repair the relationship with Lily before it was too late. For the next few days, Sarah couldn't shake the invitation from her mind. She stared at the envelope on her kitchen counter, torn between the desire to ignore it and the overwhelming urge to reach out. The past 30 years had been filled with silence, with Sarah's heart breaking a little more each day as she wondered where Lily was and how she had been. Would her daughter even recognize her now? Her once auburn hair had turned to soft gray, and the lines on her face told the story of a life lived with quiet sorrow. The disease had left her thinner, her skin slightly yellowed, and her energy was draining away each day. The prospect of seeing Lily again, after all this time, felt both like a gift and a burden. She had so much to say, but so little time to say it. The phone call came just days after she received the invitation. It was the RSVP number for the wedding. Sarah's heart raced as she dialed, knowing this was the moment that would determine whether this reunion would happen. The phone rang several times before a familiar voice answered. Hello. Lily's voice was unmistakably hers, but there was an edge to it that made Sarah's heart ache. Lily, Sarah said softly, her voice trembling. It's Mom. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Sarah could almost feel the distance between them growing with each second. Finally, Lily spoke, her voice neutral but steady. I see you got the invitation. Yes, I did, Sarah replied, struggling to keep her composure. I'd love to come. I'm so proud of you. You've grown into such a beautiful woman. Another pause. Lily's voice softened, but only slightly. Good. Actually, I was hoping we could meet before the wedding. There are some details about the wedding we should discuss. The meeting was set for the next week. A coffee shop near Sarah's apartment, somewhere neutral, where they could talk without the weight of years of history hanging over them. Sarah arrived early, her heart pounding with nerves and anticipation. She had so many questions, so many words she had kept inside for so long. But she didn't know if Lily would be open to hearing them. She didn't know if it was too late. When Lily arrived, Sarah barely recognized her. The little girl she had once held in her arms had grown into a confident, self-assured woman. Her dark hair was cut into a stylish bob, and she carried herself with the grace of someone who had everything figured out. Sarah felt a pang of regret for all the years they had missed. They sat at a corner table, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. It was as if the weight of their past was too heavy to lift, too difficult to even address. Finally, Lily spoke. I heard you've done well for yourself. It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. Yes, I built my interior design business from nothing. It's been fulfilling. There was no mention of the life Sarah had built without Lily. No mention of the lonely holidays or the birthdays spent without the one person who should have been there. Sarah couldn't bring herself to say those things. She wasn't sure if Lily was ready to hear them. As the conversation went on, it became clear that Lily wasn't looking for reconciliation. She wasn't looking to heal old wounds. She was looking for something else money. She needed help paying for the wedding. Sarah felt a sharp sting as she realized that the invitation wasn't a gesture of love or reconciliation. It was a request. Lily's financial troubles had brought her back into Sarah's life, and it stung. But Sarah couldn't refuse. Despite the pain, she agreed to help. The money she offered would be her final act of love for Lily, even if that love was unspoken and one-sided. Weeks passed, and Sarah threw herself into planning the perfect wedding for her daughter. She wasn't involved in the details, but she paid for everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, everything. She worked silently behind the scenes, and it was clear that Lily was grateful for the help, but still distant. The day of the wedding arrived, and Sarah watched from the sidelines, seated at a table far from the head table. Lily, radiant in her wedding gown, was escorted down the aisle by Richard, the man who had torn their family apart. Sarah's heart ached as she realized that she was still invisible in Lily's eyes. She had done everything for this moment, but still, she was a stranger to her own daughter. At some point during the reception, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't leave the wedding without telling Lily the truth. The truth about her illness, about Richard's betrayal, and about the years of silence that had kept them apart. She wrote a letter and slipped it onto Lily's place setting. It was a letter of truth, a letter that would change everything. As Sarah waited outside the venue, she heard the sound of the wedding guests' chatter fade into silence. The letter had been read aloud. Sarah knew that everything had changed. She had given Lily the truth she had hidden for so long, and there was no turning back. What came next was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Sarah felt at peace. She had done what she could. Now, it was up to Lily to decide how to move forward. As Sarah walked away from the vineyard, her heart was heavy, but there was a sense of relief. She had faced the past, and now there was room for healing. Time was short, but it was enough to finally reconnect with the daughter she had lost. The emotional reunion at the coffee shop was bustling with the usual midday crowd. The hum of conversation mixed with the clinking of cups and saucers, a backdrop to the moment Sarah had anticipated for so many years. She sat at a corner table, her hands clasped around a cup of coffee she no longer had the patience to drink. The steam curled up into the air, but Sarah barely noticed it. Her eyes were fixed on the door, watching each person who entered, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the meeting she had both longed for and feared. Her daughter, Lily, was coming. After 30 years of estrangement, they were finally going to see each other again. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It wasn't supposed to be a cold, formal meeting in a coffee shop. But life had a way of breaking things apart, and now this was all Sarah had. This was the moment where she hoped, maybe, just maybe, they could start to rebuild what had been shattered so long ago. The door opened, and in walked Lily. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. For a brief moment, she was overwhelmed by the sight of her daughter. Lily had grown into a woman. The little girl Sarah had once held in her arms, the child she had loved and lost, was gone. In her place stood a woman tall, confident, and almost unrecognizable. Her dark hair was cut into a sleek bob, and she carried herself with the air of someone who had it all together. There was a sense of grace and poise about her that Sarah had never seen before. She felt an aching sense of loss wash over her, realizing how much time had passed, how much had been stolen from them both. Lily walked into the coffee shop, her eyes scanning the room. Sarah stood up, her legs shaky, and waved slightly. Lily's gaze briefly flicked over her, but she didn't seem to recognize the gesture. Her eyes were cautious, guarded. Finally, their eyes met, and Lily's face softened just a little. She approached Sarah's table, and the moment of confrontation that Sarah had imagined for years was upon them. Lily took a seat across from her, not waiting for an invitation. Her movements were deliberate, as though she had done this 100 times before. The smile that crept onto her face was polite, distant. There was no warmth in it, just a professional, practiced expression. "Mom," Lily said, her voice cool and formal. The word felt strange on her lips, and Sarah noticed the pause before she said it, as if it were a foreign term, not something she had used in years. "Lily," Sarah replied, the word carrying the weight of 1,000 emotions. She wanted to reach out, to take her daughter's hand, to pull her into an embrace that could mend the years of pain and separation. But she didn't. They both remained seated, like two strangers who were forced to occupy the same space. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Sarah could feel the years between them stretching out in the room, an invisible barrier neither of them knew how to cross. Lily fidgeted with her cup, clearly unsure of how to start the conversation. Sarah's heart ached. She had hoped for a moment of recognition, a sign that Lily still saw her as the mother who had once cared for her. But there was nothing. Only formality, distance, and the coldness of the past hanging heavily in the air. "So," Lily finally said, breaking the silence, "I suppose we should talk about the wedding." The word stung. The wedding. Of all the things to discuss, they had to start there. It was as if everything else, the lost years, the fractured relationship, the aching silence had been reduced to this one, business-like conversation. The wedding was the reason they were sitting here today. Lily didn't want to talk about anything else. She had invited Sarah because she had to, not because she wanted to, and Sarah, despite everything, couldn't help but feel grateful for the chance to be involved, even if it was just in this distant, detached way. "Of course," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She forced a smile, trying to push the lump in her throat down. "I'd love to help." Lily nodded, her gaze focused on the wedding planner's notebook in front of her. She flipped through the pages, pausing every now and then to make notes. There was no acknowledgement of the years apart, no mention of the pain. It was all about the wedding arrangements, details, vendors. Sarah's mind wandered as Lily spoke, the sound of her daughter's voice like an echo of someone she once knew. "So, we need to finalize the venue," Lily continued, not looking up. "Dad's been pushing for a bigger place, but I'm not sure about the costs. I thought you could help with the venue." She glanced up briefly, her eyes scanning Sarah's face. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in her expression, an expectation, a hope. But Sarah wasn't sure if it was genuine or just a pragmatic request. "I can help with that," Sarah said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. Inside, she was torn. The money was nothing compared to what she had lost, but the way Lily spoke so matter-of-factly, like this was just another business transaction, cut deep. Sarah had hoped, after all this time, that there would be something more between them. Something beyond the financial help, beyond the formalities. But it seemed that was all Lily wanted, a check, a signature, a way to make the wedding perfect. That was all. Lily's gaze moved back to her notebook, and Sarah's heart broke a little more. This wasn't a reunion. It was just business. As the conversation continued, Sarah found herself slipping into a numbness. She answered Lily's questions about catering and venue options, never mentioning the years of hurt or the desperate longing she had felt for her daughter. She didn't ask Lily about her life, her dreams, or what had changed in all those years. What was the point? Lily had already made it clear that she wasn't interested in that kind of conversation. She wasn't interested in Sarah's life, only in the wedding details that still needed to be handled. "Mom," Lily said after a long pause, her eyes meeting Sarah's again. "I know this is all awkward, but I just don't know how to talk to you. It's been so long." Her voice faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, pushing forward. "I didn't expect this to be easy." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. That was the closest thing to an apology she had heard in years. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the first time in their meeting, Lily seemed human again, vulnerable. She wasn't the confident, unapproachable woman who had walked into the coffee shop. She was a daughter, a woman who had been hurt too. But Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. She had spent so many years in silence, guarding herself from further pain, that the idea of opening up felt foreign. "It's okay," Sarah said, her voice shaky but firm. "I understand. She stopped herself. No, it wasn't okay. It would never be okay. But this wasn't the time for that. Not here, not now." Lily gave a small, tight smile. "I'll send you the details," she said. "Thanks for helping. I know it's not easy." And just like that, the moment passed. The conversation turned back to wedding details, and Sarah sat back, feeling more like a stranger in her daughter's life than ever before. This wasn't the reunion she had hoped for, the reunion she had dreamed of during all those lonely nights. But it was a start, a painful, awkward start. As Lily stood to leave, she gave Sarah a quick, formal hug. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was a hug between two people who had been separated for far too long, and neither knew how to fix what had been broken. "Goodbye, Mom," Lily said as she pulled away. And for a moment, Sarah thought she saw something in her eyes, something like regret, or maybe just a glimpse of the girl she had once known. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Goodbye, Lily," Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. And as Lily walked out the door, Sarah sat back down, her heart heavy with disappointment and hope. She had come to this meeting expecting something more, but all she had gotten was a glimpse into the distance that still lay between them. A distance that, at least for now, seemed impossible to close. A silent sacrifice as the weeks passed following the awkward reunion with Lily. Sarah found herself lost in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Though their coffee shop meeting had been filled with polite exchanges and formalities, one thing had become clear: Lily needed help. And, despite the deep emotional distance between them, Sarah had agreed to offer it. Perhaps out of a lingering hope that this financial gesture would be a way to reconnect, or perhaps because, deep down, she simply wanted to do something for her daughter, something that might make up for the lost years. At first, Sarah hesitated. She wasn't sure if this was the right thing to do. After all, their reunion had been more of a business transaction than a heartfelt moment of connection. But there was something in Lily's eyes when she had spoken about the wedding, an unspoken plea, a silent understanding that this was what Sarah could do for her. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about mending their broken relationship. It was about the wedding. about giving Lily the day she had always dreamed of, despite everything that had happened between them. And so, Sarah agreed. She didn't have the luxury of time to second-guess her decision. She knew her diagnosis was terminal, and each passing day felt like one more precious moment slipping away. Her cancer had already started to take its toll on her body. She felt weaker, more exhausted, her once vibrant spirit dulled by the relentless progression of the disease. She was fighting a battle against time, but that didn't stop her from wanting to help Lily in whatever way she could. Sarah began throwing herself into the wedding plans, becoming a silent architect behind the scenes. She wasn't the one to make the decisions. Lily and her father were in charge of those details. But Sarah took it upon herself to fund the venue, the catering, the flowers, and every other detail that came with planning a wedding. She didn't care about the cost. The money was nothing compared to the years she had lost, the years that Lily had been kept from her, the years of pain and isolation. This was her chance, her last chance, to give something back to her daughter. She threw herself into the preparations with a determination that surprised even herself. It wasn't just about the money, it was about creating the perfect day for Lily. The day that she should have had all those years ago. The day that, in Sarah's mind, could somehow make up for the emotional void that had existed between them. Each decision was made with care, selecting the flowers, the right catering company, and even the smallest details. Everything had to be perfect. Sarah wasn't there to make the decisions, but she was there in the background, making sure that everything was arranged according to Lily's preferences. She had no say in the final choice, but her checkbook was a silent testament to her involvement. Her illness didn't matter. The physical strain didn't matter. This was for Lily. As she went through the motions of planning, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of frustration. She was giving everything, her money, her energy, her time to this wedding, but Lily barely acknowledged it. There was no mention of the sacrifices Sarah was making, no appreciation for the fact that she was doing all of this despite the deep wounds that had never healed. Lily was too caught up in her own life, in her own world, to notice the silent sacrifice her mother was making. It hurt, but Sarah said nothing. She didn't expect Lily to understand. She didn't need thanks. What mattered was that Lily had the perfect wedding, even if it meant Sarah was nothing more than a distant, invisible figure behind the scenes. It was in these quiet moments of reflection that Sarah realized something profound. This wedding wasn't just about Lily's happiness. It was about Sarah's need for closure. It was about her desperate attempt to make up for the years she had spent away from her daughter. The more she worked on the wedding plans, the more she realized that this might be her last chance to make things right. Her health was declining rapidly, and her doctors had already told her there was little they could do. The treatments were only a temporary fix, buying her a little more time, but not much. Time was slipping through her fingers like sand, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Sarah's physical pain was a constant reminder of the ticking clock that loomed over her. The cancer had already ravaged her body. She felt weaker each day, her energy drained by the chemotherapy that left her exhausted and frail. She was thinner now, her once flushed skin a dull shade of yellow. But through it all, she pushed forward, unwilling to let her declining health stop her from giving Lily the wedding she deserved. She put on a brave face, hiding the weariness and the pain from everyone, including her daughter. But in the quiet moments, when she was alone, the weight of the sacrifice bore down on her. It wasn't just the financial cost. It was the emotional cost. The realization that she would never get to see Lily in the way she had once imagined, growing old together, sharing holidays, and building memories. Instead, Sarah had to content herself with giving Lily a perfect wedding, a perfect day, even if it meant being a shadow in the background, unseen and unacknowledged. The emotional strain of the wedding preparations began to take its toll on Sarah. The exhaustion from the chemotherapy, combined with the emotional weight of seeing Lily move forward with her life without her, was unbearable at times. Every decision she made, every dollar she spent, felt like a reminder that she would never get to be the mother she had hoped to be. She would never get to be the one to walk Lily down the aisle, to witness the joy and the love that should have been a part of their lives. Instead, she was a silent figure, arranging everything from the shadows, hoping that her presence in Lily's life, even in this distant way, might somehow make up for the years of silence. In the quiet of her home, Sarah often wondered if Lily would ever realize what she had done. Would she ever understand the depth of the sacrifice her mother was making? Would she ever recognize the love that lay beneath the financial help, the support, the endless arrangements? Or would Sarah always remain invisible in Lily's eyes, a mother who had been pushed out of her daughter's life by the lies and manipulations of her ex-husband? Despite the doubts and the emotional toll, Sarah kept moving forward. She kept planning, kept working, kept giving. Each check she wrote, each phone call she made, each decision she helped to finalize, these were her contributions. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need thanks. What mattered was that Lily would have the wedding she deserved. That, perhaps, was the only thing she could do for her daughter now. As the wedding day approached, Sarah found herself torn between the joy of seeing Lily happy and the sorrow of knowing that this might be her last chance to connect with her. She wanted to be there for Lily, to offer her support in person, but she also knew that her time was running out. The cancer had already taken its toll, and each passing day was a reminder that Sarah's health was slipping away. But despite everything, despite the pain and the emotional distance, Sarah pressed on. This was her final act of love as sacrifice, silent and unspoken, that she hoped would resonate long after the wedding day was over. Feeling invisible, the wedding day had finally arrived. Sarah had been waiting for this moment for months, anticipating the day when her daughter, Lily, would step into a new chapter of her life. It was supposed to be a day of joy, of celebration, of healing. And yet, as Sarah stood outside the venue, her heart felt heavy, weighed down by the knowledge that this would be a day where, despite all her efforts and sacrifices, she would remain a stranger to the daughter she had once held in her arms. Willow Creek Vineyard was picturesque, the rolling hills and towering oak trees forming the perfect backdrop for a wedding. The air was crisp with the hint of autumn, and the sun bathed the reception hall in a warm, golden glow. But for Sarah, the beauty of the day felt distant. It was like a scene she could see, but not fully experience. She wasn't part of this moment. She had been excluded, and as she made her way inside, the reality of her situation hit her with a wave of sadness. Sarah had spent months planning, arranging, and paying for the wedding, all in the hopes that it would somehow lead to a reconnection with Lily. She had poured every ounce of her energy into making this day perfect, designing the details, selecting the flowers, organizing the catering, and covering every expense. But as she entered the reception hall, it became clear that no amount of sacrifice would ever bring her back into the fold of Lily's life. She was led to her seat, placed far away from the head table, in the far corner of the room, as if she were a guest at a distant acquaintance's wedding. There was no mention of her role in the planning, no acknowledgement of the sacrifices she had made to make the day as perfect as it was. Sarah's heart sank as she looked around. She was surrounded by strangers, people who barely knew her, but there she sat, watching as Lily's father, Richard, proudly sat at the head table beside his new girlfriend, Melissa. The moment felt surreal. Sarah wanted to scream, to stand up and demand recognition. She wanted to tell Lily how much she had done for this day, how much she had sacrificed for the chance to be a part of her life, even if only for a brief moment. But she didn't. She couldn't. The words caught in her throat, lodged there by the same silence that had been between them for so many years. As the ceremony unfolded, Sarah remained a silent witness to the wedding of the daughter she had lost. The sound of the wedding march filled the air as Lily walked down the aisle, radiant in her wedding gown, her arm linked with Richard's. Sarah couldn't help but feel a pang of grief as she watched from a distance. This was supposed to be her moment, too. She had dreamed of walking Lily down the aisle, of being the proud mother who got to see her daughter marry the love of her life. But instead, she was forced to sit at the back, watching as Richard, the man who had torn their family apart, took the place that should have been hers. The ceremony proceeded without incident, and Sarah's emotions were a complex mix of pride, sorrow, and anger. She was proud of Lily, proud to see her so happy, but the pain of exclusion gnawed at her. She had been an invisible presence in Lily's life for so long, and now, on this day that was supposed to be a celebration of love, she was reminded once again of her place in it all, or rather, her lack of place. As the guests moved to the reception, Sarah lingered behind, reluctant to enter the hall just yet. She stood by the window, watching as the newlyweds shared their first dance, their faces lit up with love and joy. And then, the realization hit her again, sharper than before. She was still invisible. She had spent so much time trying to re-enter Lily's life, trying to find a way back in her heart, but all her efforts had amounted to nothing. Sarah had been pushed to the margins, relegated to the farthest corner of the room, where no one could see her, where her presence didn't matter. When she finally made her way into the reception hall, it was with a sense of resignation. The room was filled with laughter and music, the clinking of glasses and the hum of conversation. But none of it felt real to Sarah. She was just a spectator, a ghost in the background. As she made her way to her assigned seat, she couldn't help but notice how Lily and Richard were surrounded by their family and friends, while Sarah was isolated at the back. She was invisible to them all. Throughout the evening, Sarah tried to remain composed, to smile and nod when people spoke to her, to play the role of the dutiful mother who had helped make this day possible. But inside, she was breaking. She had spent so many years trying to prove to Lily that she loved her, that she hadn't abandoned her, that she had always been there, despite the distance. But none of that mattered now. She was just a financial contributor to this day, a person who had made sure everything was perfect, yet whose existence was unimportant. As the speeches began, Sarah was struck by the emptiness of it all. Richard stood at the head table, raising his glass to toast Lily and her new husband, his words dripping with pride and affection. It was as if Sarah didn't exist, as if her role in the wedding planning hadn't even happened. He spoke as though he were the sole architect of this day, the one who had shaped Lily's life and guided her to this moment. Sarah felt a familiar surge of anger, but she stifled it. She had long ago learned that showing emotion wouldn't help her cause. It would only make her feel more invisible. Later, during the reception, Sarah was invited to join the other guests in dancing, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. The thought of joining the celebration, knowing that she had no place in it, made her feel even more alone. She sat at her table, watching as Lily danced with Richard, the man who had taken everything from her. The sight of them together, father and daughter, so effortlessly enjoying each other's company, was more than Sarah could bear. It was as if she didn't even exist in Lily's world anymore. At that moment, the weight of her sacrifice hit her harder than ever. She had given everything to this wedding, to this day, hoping for a moment of connection with her daughter. She had poured her heart, her money, and her time into making sure that Lily had the wedding she deserved. And yet, despite it all, she was still an outsider, still invisible. Sarah had hoped that this day would be a turning point, a chance to rebuild the broken bridge between them. But instead, she found herself standing at the edge, watching from a distance, unable to cross over. As the night wore on, Sarah finally decided it was time to leave. She excused herself from the table, feeling the eyes of strangers on her, but none of them knew her story. None of them understood the pain she carried. She didn't matter to them, just as she didn't matter to Lily. It was as though the years of love, of sacrifice, had never happened. She was still the same woman who had been erased from her daughter's life all those years ago, and the weight of that reality crushed her. On her way out, she paused for a moment, looking back at the reception hall. The sound of laughter and music filled the air, but for Sarah, it was all hollow. Lily was happy, and that was what mattered. But in the midst of that happiness, Sarah felt more alone than she ever had before. Her presence, her love, had meant nothing. She was just a shadow in Lily's life, and no matter what she did, she could never fully step into the light. The catalyst for truth. As Sarah sat quietly at her table, watching the wedding unfold around her, a sense of resignation washed over her. She had done everything she could to make this day perfect for Lily, to show her daughter that, despite the years of silence, she was still there. But no matter how much she had sacrificed, no matter how much she had given, she had remained an outsider in Lily's life. The pain of it had become unbearable. She had been invisible to Lily, just another guest at the wedding, a financial contributor, but not a mother. For the first time that day, Sarah felt a deep, unsettling sense of clarity. She had spent decades burying the truth, suppressing the pain of her past, and protecting Lily from the reality of what had happened between her father and herself. She had done it all for Lily, believing that keeping the truth hidden would protect her, that would shield her from the hurt that Sarah had endured. But today, as she watched Lily dance with her father, laughing and enjoying the perfect day that Sarah had made possible, something inside her shifted. She could no longer remain silent. She could no longer protect Lily from the truth. It was time to tell her everything. The years of silence, the years of being erased from Lily's life by Richard's lies, had all led to this moment. Sarah had always believed that her absence was for Lily's own good, that keeping her distance was a form of self-sacrifice. But today, as she watched her daughter move further away from her, further into a life where Sarah's presence was barely acknowledged, Sarah realized that keeping quiet had only perpetuated the distance. It had only allowed Richard to continue his reign of manipulation, painting Sarah as the villain and Lily as the victim of her own mother's abandonment. As the evening progressed, Sarah couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that she needed to speak, to say something, anything that might begin to repair the decades of damage. But how? What words could she possibly say to Lily to make her understand the truth? There were so many things left unsaid, so many secrets that had remained hidden for far too long. How could she possibly explain the reality of her relationship with Richard, the years of emotional abuse, the lies that had driven them apart, and her own illness, which was slowly but surely taking her away from Lily for good? The decision came to her like a whisper in the back of her mind, quiet yet powerful. She didn't need to speak the words aloud. She had spent years writing letters to Lily, letters that had never been read, letters that had been returned unopened, letters that had been ignored and forgotten. But this time, the letter would be different. This time, the words would be her final attempt at reaching her daughter. She had no more time to waste. She had no more time to hide the truth. With trembling hands, Sarah pulled out a piece of stationery from her bag. She had been carrying it with her for the past few days, unsure of what to write, unsure of how to begin. But as she sat there, watching the reception unfold in front of her, the words began to flow. She didn't think about it too much. She didn't have the luxury of time for second-guessing. She wrote from her heart, from the place where years of pain, regret, and love had been buried. She wrote about Richard's infidelities, about how he had cheated on her for years, and how those affairs had destroyed their marriage. She wrote about the moment she found out she was pregnant with Lily, about how Richard had pressured her to terminate the pregnancy, about how he called her weak for wanting to keep their child. She wrote about the lies he had told Lily, about how he had made her believe that Sarah had abandoned them both. But most of all, she wrote about her illness, the cancer that was slowly but surely taking her away from Lily, the cancer that would prevent her from seeing her daughter grow old, from witnessing the milestones of her life. It wasn't fair, Sarah thought. It wasn't fair that Lily had been kept in the dark for so long. It wasn't fair that Richard had used his wealth and influence to control the narrative of their lives, to make her out to be the villain while he played the role of the hero. Sarah had fought for Lily, but in the end, it felt like she had lost. She didn't want to die without telling her daughter the truth. As Sarah wrote, her hands shook with a mixture of fear and determination. What if Lily didn't believe her? What if she rejected the letter, just as she had rejected Sarah all those years ago? What if this was the final attempt at reconciliation, and it only pushed Lily further away? But Sarah couldn't worry about that now. She had to tell the truth, no matter the consequences. She had to let Lily know that she had never abandoned her, that she had always loved her, that the lies Richard had told were just that, lies. And most of all, she had to tell Lily that she was running out of time, that her mother was dying, and that this might be the last chance they had to rebuild their relationship. The room was growing colder as the evening wore on, but Sarah's words burned in her mind. She wrote about her love for Lily, about how much she wished she could have been there for her, about how much she had wanted to be a part of her life. But time had slipped away, and now, All she had left were these words that might be the only way to bridge the gap that had existed between them for so long. When the letter was finished, Sarah folded it carefully, her heart heavy with the weight of the truth she had just revealed. She stood up, her legs shaky beneath her, and made her way to Lily's seat at the head table. The reception was in full swing, and no one seemed to notice her as she walked through the crowd. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the music, it all felt so distant, so out of reach. She had never felt more alone. When she reached Lily's seat, Sarah paused for a moment, looking at the place setting. She knew that this letter would change everything. She had no idea how Lily would react, no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. The silence was broken. The truth was out. With trembling hands, Sarah placed the letter on Lily's plate, carefully adjusting it so it wouldn't be overlooked. She stood there for a moment, looking at it, and then slowly walked away. Her heart was racing in her chest, but there was also a sense of peace. She had done what she could. The rest was up to Lily. As Sarah left the reception hall, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this letter would change things. Maybe Lily would read it and finally understand the truth. Maybe, just maybe, they could start over. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she had done everything she could. She had told the truth, and in doing so, she had given Lily the chance to know her not as the villain in her father's story, but as the mother who had always loved her. The moment of reckoning. The evening was unfolding in the way weddings often do, with laughter, chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the warm glow of lights reflecting off polished surfaces. The atmosphere was filled with joy, yet for Sarah, it felt like an out-of-body experience. She was present, but not really part of it, watching as the people around her celebrated a moment she could never fully embrace. Despite everything she had done to be included in this day, she was still an outsider. She had placed her heart and soul into creating this perfect day for Lily. But the truth she had written down, the letter she had left behind at Lily's seat, had changed the landscape entirely. Sarah could see Lily from across the room, radiant in her wedding gown, surrounded by well-wishers and her father, Richard. Their smile seemed so genuine, but Sarah knew better. She knew the truth about Richard's affairs, the lies, the manipulation, and now, that truth was waiting to be revealed. Sarah's heart raced as she sat back in her seat, hoping against hope that the letter she had written would finally shatter the facade that had been built for so long. For years, Richard had controlled the narrative, painting Sarah as the villain in Lily's life. It had worked. Lily had believed the lies, and Sarah had suffered in silence. But tonight, everything was about to change. The silence that had stretched for decades would be broken, and the words that had been buried for so long would be exposed. The letter, written with trembling hands, was the key to unlocking everything. It was Sarah's final attempt to make things right, to expose Richard for who he really was, and, hopefully, to give Lily the truth she had always deserved. The reception continued around her, but Sarah couldn't focus on anything but the letter. She had no idea how Lily would react. Would she understand? Would she be angry? Or would the weight of the truth be too much to bear? Sarah had no way of knowing what would happen next. But she knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back now. As the evening wore on, the reception reached its climax. The speeches had been made, the toasts had been raised, and the atmosphere had begun to settle into a more relaxed, celebratory vibe. It was then that Sarah saw Lily walk toward the front of the room, holding the letter in her hand. The sound of her heels clicking on the floor seemed to slow in Sarah's mind, the moment stretching out like an eternity. Lily's face was unreadable, but the letter was clearly in her hands. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Was she really about to read it? The room grew quiet as Lily reached the microphone, the rustling of the paper the only sound filling the air. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, her palms sweating. She didn't know what to expect, but she was ready for whatever was coming next. The moment had arrived. Lily cleared her throat softly, and for a moment, Sarah thought she might say something else, perhaps something kind, something that would acknowledge the effort her mother had put into this day. But instead, Lily spoke the words that would change everything. "This letter," she said, her voice steady but emotional, was left for me by my mother. The room fell silent, every guest pausing mid-conversation, their attention now fully on Lily. Sarah's heart raced as she watched her daughter hold the letter up. She felt exposed, vulnerable. The years of hiding the truth, the years of silence, were now unraveling in front of an audience she had never imagined would witness it. The truth, the painful reality of what Sarah had lived through, was about to be laid bare for everyone to hear. Lily took a deep breath, and with a voice that trembled ever so slightly, she began to read the letter aloud. "My dearest Lily, I've written you so many letters over the years, but this one is the hardest of them all. There are things I've kept from you, things I should have told you long ago, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to hurt you, but I realize now that the silence between us has hurt us both in ways words can't describe." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had written those words so carefully, so deliberately, but hearing them spoken aloud in front of so many people felt like a weight on her chest. She wanted to run, to hide, but she stayed in her seat, knowing that there was no escaping the consequences of this moment. Lily continued reading, her voice gaining strength. "The truth is, your father Richard didn't tell you everything. He didn't tell you about the affairs, about the betrayal, about the lies he told you about me. I know you've been told that I abandoned you, that I didn't want you, that I didn't care. But the truth is far more complicated than that." The room was completely still now, the only sound coming from Lily's voice as she read the words Sarah had written. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, and she could see the confused and concerned looks on the faces of the guests. She wasn't sure if they were more shocked by the revelation or by the fact that this was happening at Lily's wedding. Either way, the truth was out there now. "I didn't want to leave you," Lily continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "But Richard, your father, made sure I was kept away. He convinced you that I didn't love you, that I didn't want to be a part of your life. And for years, I believed that you hated me. I believed that you had moved on without me. But I never stopped loving you, Lily. I never stopped wanting to be your mother." As Sarah listened to Lily read, her emotions swirled inside her: anger, sadness, relief. She could feel the weight of the years of silence crashing down on her. This was at the moment she had dreaded but also hoped for. She had fought for so long to have this conversation, to share her side of the story, and now, in front of everyone, it was happening. There was no hiding from the truth anymore. Lily's voice faltered as she read the final part of the letter. "I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors have told me that I don't have much time left, but I wanted to tell you the truth before it's too late. I wanted you to know that I always loved you, and I always will. I hope you can forgive me for not being there. But I was kept away, and now all I have left is the hope that you can understand." The room fell completely silent. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she saw Lily's eyes fill with tears. The woman she had once known, the child she had lost, was finally hearing the truth that had been hidden from her for so long. Sarah had always believed that the truth would set them free, but now, seeing Lily's face, she wasn't sure if it had come too late. For a moment, no one spoke. The guests exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. It was as though time had stopped. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable, and terrified of what would happen next. But then, Lily lowered the letter and looked around the room. Her gaze settled on Richard, who was now standing at the head table, his face pale and his expression unreadable. The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable, before Lily spoke again. "Dad," she said, her voice strong but shaky. "Is this true?" Sarah could see the tension in Richard's body, the way he stiffened at the question. He didn't respond immediately, and for a long moment, the room was filled with nothing but the sound of Lily's breath and the murmurs of the guests. Finally, Richard's voice broke the silence. I don't know what you're talking about, but the damage had been done. The truth had been revealed. The years of lies, manipulation, and deceit were laid bare for everyone to see. Sarah watched as Lily turned away from her father, her face a mixture of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. This was the moment of reckoning, the moment when everything Sarah had endured came crashing down, not just for her, but for Lily and for everyone who had been caught up in Richard's lies. For Sarah, there was no going back. The truth had been exposed, and now there was nothing left to hide. Lily's emotional journey. The room was thick with the weight of the truth. It had come crashing down in the most unexpected way through a letter left at her seat, a final revelation from the mother she had been told had abandoned her. As Lily stood there, holding the paper in her trembling hands, she felt as if the floor had been ripped out from beneath her. The world she thought she knew, the life she had carefully constructed around her understanding of her parents, was shattering in front of her eyes. She had spent so many years living with the story Richard had told her. It had been a story of abandonment, of betrayal, of a mother who didn't want her, a father who had to pick up the pieces and raise her alone. Lily had grown up with that narrative, one she had never thought to question, because why would she? It made sense. Richard had always been the strong, supportive parent, the one who had worked so hard to provide for her, the one who had fought to keep their little family intact when Sarah supposedly walked away from it all. All of those years of birthdays, holidays, and milestones without Sarah, those were all framed by Richard's version of events. But now, the letter had torn it all apart. The lies she had believed for decades were suddenly exposed for what they truly were. Richard hadn't been the hero she had always seen him as. He wasn't the loving father who had sacrificed everything for her well-being. No, he was the architect of her confusion, her pain, and her years of separation from the mother who had never stopped loving her. Lily could feel her heart racing as she read the words, trying to process them as they sank in. Richard's infidelities, the betrayal that had destroyed her parents' marriage, the manipulations that had pushed Sarah out of their lives, everything she had believed was wrong. She could hardly believe it. How had she never seen the truth? How could she have been so blind, so willing to accept Richard's version of the story without question? It hurt. It hurt in a way she couldn't describe. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming, not just toward Richard, but also toward herself for having been so easily manipulated, so willing to live in ignorance for so many years. Lily's mind raced as she processed the weight of the letter. Her gaze shifted from the paper to the room around her, filled with guests who had no idea what was unfolding. She felt like she was trapped in a bubble, the noise of the reception fading away as the words from the letter echoed in her mind. She could see Richard standing at the head table, his expression faltering for just a moment, before he masked it with the same charm he had used to manipulate her for so long. How many lies had he told her? How many times had he twisted the truth to paint her mother as the villain? How many years had she spent living in a fog of half-truths, never questioning the narrative that had been fed to her? It was as if a veil had been lifted from her eyes. The world she had lived in, the world she had believed was true, no longer made sense. She had been lied to not just by Richard, but by the very person she had trusted most. The revelation hit her like a wave, pulling her under, leaving her gasping for air. She felt an overwhelming rush of emotions: anger, confusion, hurt, and a deep sense of loss. All the years of longing for a mother who had never truly left her, all the pain of believing she had been abandoned, now seemed like a cruel joke. But even as she struggled with the crushing weight of the truth, something else began to shift within her. A flicker of something, perhaps a flicker of hope, began to burn. As painful as it was, the truth was liberating. For the first time, she understood the full story, the full scope of the damage Richard had caused. It wasn't just about the lies about Sarah. It was about the way Richard had used his power, his influence, to rewrite her history, to make her believe a story that wasn't hers. He had manipulated her emotions, her thoughts, and her entire understanding of who she was and where she came from. He had taken everything her love, her trust, and twisted it to fit his narrative. As Lily's mind spun, her gaze landed on her mother. Sarah, sitting at the back of the room, alone and silent, her face unreadable but somehow full of sorrow. She had spent all these years trying to reach her daughter, trying to mend the rift that had been created between them, but Sarah had never stood a chance. How could she, when Richard had cut her out of Lily's life completely? How could Sarah have fought against the manipulation, the lies, and the emotional damage that had been done to both of them? Lily's chest tightened as she stared at her mother. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. After everything, after all the years of believing her mother had chosen to leave, she was here, in the same room as her, watching from a distance, silently enduring the pain of a broken relationship. Lily's heart ached for the woman she had once called her mother. She had been so angry, so certain that Sarah had abandoned her, that she had never once stopped to consider that perhaps she was the one who had been wrong. For the first time in years, Lily felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long time: regret. Regret for all the years spent hating Sarah, for all the years of believing lies that had been planted in her mind. She had allowed herself to be controlled, to be manipulated by Richard, and now she was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered truth. Lily turned her attention back to the letter, reading over the words again. Her mother's cancer, her illness, her dying wish to make things right. Everything was coming into focus, and it was overwhelming. She had been given the chance to finally know the truth, and now it was time for her to decide what to do with it. The decision was hers: whether to accept the truth, to confront Richard, to make amends with her mother, and to rebuild the relationship that had been lost. The emotions swirled within her, overwhelming her all at once. Part of her wanted to lash out, to scream at Richard, to demand answers from him. But another part of her was quieter, more introspective, as if the weight of what had been revealed needed time to settle. She could feel the anger bubbling inside her, but she also knew that there was no point in holding on to that anger anymore. Richard had already done enough damage. The truth had set her free, but it had also left her with a sense of sadness, of loss. There was so much she didn't know, so much she had missed, and the thought of trying to rebuild it all seemed like an impossible task. But she wasn't ready to give up yet. Lily knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. She had spent so many years living in the shadow of Richard's lies, and now it was time to walk out of that shadow and into the light. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but Lily knew that she had to take the first step, whether that meant confronting her father, reaching out to Sarah, or simply understanding the truth of her own story. With a deep breath, Lily looked towards Sarah again. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: the journey to healing, to rebuilding, would begin with the truth. And the truth, as painful as it was, had already begun to change everything. A reconnection after decades. The air felt thick with the weight of the moment. After all the years of silence, of avoidance, of lies that had been told, the truth had finally come out. But now that it was out in the open, the real work had begun. Lily stood just a few steps away from Sarah, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come here today with every intention of confronting the years of hurt, the misunderstandings, and the questions that had haunted her for so long. But now that she was face to face with her mother, it didn't feel as simple as she had imagined. There were so many emotions swirling inside her: anger, confusion, regret, and something else, a deep ache for the years they had lost. For so long, she had built her life around the narrative Richard had given her. The story of abandonment. The story of a mother who had chosen to walk away. But now, as the truth unfolded before her, she was left to pick up the pieces of her own heart, to make sense of the shattered image she had of both her parents. Sarah was sitting quietly in a corner of the room, her frail body wrapped in the soft folds of a blanket, her once vibrant eyes now dimmed by the illness that was slowly claiming her life. She looked different than Lily remembered. She had changed, not just physically, but in the way she carried herself. There was a vulnerability in her posture, a quiet resignation, as if the weight of the years of estrangement had taken its toll on her soul. The diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer had already begun its work, and Lily could see the toll it had taken. Her mother was thinner, more fragile, and yet there was something about her that still felt familiar, something about her that still reached out to Lily, even in this dark moment of their lives. The silence between them was suffocating. Neither of them knew how to begin. How could they? The years of separation, of hurt and betrayal, had created an almost insurmountable wall between them. They were strangers, in a sense, and yet they weren't. They were mother and daughter. They had once shared everything: laughter, tears, dreams for the future, but now it felt like they were two people who had no idea where to start. Lily stepped forward, her heart in her throat. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Mom," she said softly, the word feeling strange on her lips. She had barely said it in decades. It was a word she had learned to push away, a word that had been stolen from her by Richard's lies. But now, as she said it, she felt the weight of the years they had lost and the hope for what they could rebuild. Sarah looked up slowly, her eyes meeting Lily's. For a moment, neither of them said anything. It was as if they were both searching for the right words, but neither of them knew what to say. Finally, Sarah broke the silence, her voice quiet but steady. "I never stopped loving you, Lily. Not for a single day." Lily's chest tightened at her mother's words. She had heard so many lies in her life, so many things that had hurt her, but this felt different. The sincerity in Sarah's voice, the rawness of her confession, hit Lily like a wave. For so long, she had been angry at Sarah for leaving, for abandoning her, for not fighting harder to stay in her life. But now, as she looked at her mother, she saw the pain in her eyes, the truth in her words, and the realization hit her like a blow to the chest. Sarah had never left her. She had been kept away, and for the first time, Lily understood the depth of the sacrifice her mother had made. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Lily whispered, her voice cracking. "I've been so angry. I believed him. I believed everything he said about you. I thought you didn't care about me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears at her daughter's words. It was the confession she had waited decades to hear, the one she had longed for, but it still hurt. It hurt because the damage had already been done. It hurt because no matter how much Lily had suffered, no matter how much Sarah had missed her, the years of silence and pain could never be erased. But in that moment, in Lily's apology, there was healing. It was a beginning, a fragile, delicate beginning. "I know you did, sweetheart," Sarah replied softly. "He made sure of it. He made you believe I didn't want you, that I abandoned you. But I never wanted to leave you. I never stopped trying to reach you. Every day, I prayed that somehow we could find each other again." Lily felt the weight of her mother's words settle in her chest. All this time, she had blamed Sarah, resented her for leaving, for not fighting harder. But now she understood that Sarah had been fighting the whole time. She had been fighting Richard, fighting the lies, and fighting against a system that had made it nearly impossible for her to remain in Lily's life. For the first time, Lily felt a deep sense of shame, a shame she hadn't expected. How could she have been so blind? How could she have allowed herself to believe Richard's lies for so long? Lily sank into the chair next to Sarah, her heart heavy with emotion. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to apologize for all the years she had spent pushing her mother away. But Sarah, sensing her daughter's turmoil, reached out and placed a hand on hers. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. It was a bridge, a tiny connection after years of estrangement. And in that moment, it was enough. "We have so much to talk about," Lily said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "So much time lost. I don't know where to even start." Sarah squeezed her hand gently, her eyes filled with understanding. "We start here, Lily, right here, and we take it one step at a time." For the first time in years, Lily felt a flicker of hope. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was there. They couldn't undo the past. They couldn't erase the hurt or the years of silence. But they could try. They could rebuild, piece by piece, starting with the truth. They had both been wronged by the same man, but now they had each other. They had the chance to start over, to rebuild what had been broken, and to create something new, something that was theirs, and theirs alone. Lily took a deep breath, letting the reality of the moment wash over her. "I don't know how much time we have, Mom," she said quietly, "but I want to make the most of it. I want to get to know you again. I want to hear your side of everything. I want to be your daughter again." Sarah smiled through her tears. "And I want to be your mother again. I missed you, Lily, more than you'll ever know." As the two of them sat together in the quiet of the room, the pain of the past still lingering, but the promise of a new beginning hanging in the air, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of their journey. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but it was a start. And for the first time in decades, Sarah felt like she had something to hope for, something to live for. The road ahead would be rocky, but it was theirs to navigate together, and that was all that mattered. The bittersweet gift of time. The days felt different now. The weight of everything that had happened, everything that had been kept hidden for so long, was still there, heavy on Sarah's chest. But there was also something else, something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. It was a fragile peace, one that she knew wouldn't last long, but it was enough to allow her to breathe, to finally feel like she had done something right in her life. For the first time in a long time, she could look at Lily and see the possibility of something real, something genuine between them. Sarah's cancer was advancing rapidly now. The doctors had given her a few months, maybe less. She was tired, more tired than she had ever been in her life. The treatments had drained her body, and the constant ache of her illness gnawed at her every moment. Yet despite the physical toll it took, there was something else that kept her going. It wasn't just the hope that she could make it to Lily's wedding day. It was the connection she had finally found with her daughter. The bond they had shared once upon a time was beginning to take root again, fragile as it was, and that was the one thing that made all the difference. Lily had been spending more time with Sarah, visiting her often, staying by her side when she could. It wasn't easy for either of them. The silence that had stretched between them for so long still loomed large. But every conversation, every shared moment, was a step toward healing. They talked about the past, about Richard, about the years they had lost, about the pain that had been carried in silence, and Sarah listened as Lily poured out her heart. For Lily, it was a process of reckoning. She had spent so many years angry at her mother, angry at the world, and now, with Sarah's illness looming, the time to confront that anger had arrived. In the quiet of the evenings, Sarah would find herself reflecting on the time they had left. The idea that she wouldn't get to see Lily grow old, that she wouldn't be there to watch her get married, have children, or live a full life, filled her with deep sorrow. But even with that sorrow, there was still something more, a profound gratitude. Grateful that, despite everything, they'd found their way back to each other. Grateful for the time they had now, even if it was short. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the room in warm golden hues, Sarah and Lily sat together on the porch of Sarah's house, watching the light fade. The garden around them had been Sarah's sanctuary for years, a place where she could escape from the world and tend to the flowers, the plants, the life that surrounded her. Now, it was a place of reflection, a place where Sarah could spend her remaining days, knowing she was surrounded by beauty, by memories, and finally by her daughter. Lily was silent beside her, lost in her own thoughts. Sarah could sense the weight of her emotions, the years of grief and regret that still clung to her, even as she began to forgive and heal. Lily had a long way to go before she could fully make peace with the past, but Sarah could see the change in her. It was in the way she held Sarah's hand more often now, in the way she lingered just a little longer at the door, reluctant to leave. Lily was trying to understand, trying to forgive, trying to rebuild the relationship that had been broken for so long. "Do you ever regret it?" Lily asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the soft rustling of the leaves in the evening breeze. "Regret not fighting harder to stay in my life." Sarah's heart ached at the question. She turned to look at Lily, her eyes soft with both sorrow and love. She had asked herself that question countless times in the past. The truth was, she hadn't had a choice. Richard's power and manipulation had been so overwhelming, so complete, that there had been no room for Sarah to fight back. But that wasn't something she had ever said to Lily. And now, as she looked at her daughter, finally open to hearing the truth, she knew it was time to share that. "I regret not being able to be there for you when you needed me," Sarah said slowly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I don't regret the choices I made. I had to leave Lily. I couldn't fight him alone. I couldn't fight for you and for myself when the battle was so one-sided. But I never stopped loving you. Not once." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she processed Sarah's words. She had spent so many years angry, blaming Sarah for abandoning her, for not fighting harder to stay in her life. But now, Hearing the pain and the truth in her mother's voice, Lily understood. She understood that sometimes love wasn't enough when the forces against you were too strong, too powerful. And in that moment, she felt a shift inside her, a release of the anger that had held her captive for so long. "I wish I could have known," Lily whispered. "I wish I could have known what really happened, instead of just believing the lies." "I wish I could have told you sooner," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "But I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew the truth, you would hate me even more. I didn't want to hurt you, but I see now that not telling you was the biggest mistake I ever made." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. Sarah knew that words couldn't undo the damage of the past, but they could bring healing. They could bring understanding. And for the first time in so long, Sarah felt like they were on the road to something new, something fragile but real. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Lily said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything. For believing him. For not seeing the truth." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and sorrow. "It's not your fault, Lily. You were a child, and he made sure you believed everything he said. But now we have time. We have time to make things right." Lily looked at her mother, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to make up for all those years. I don't know if I can forgive myself." Sarah smiled gently, wiping a tear from Lily's cheek. "You don't need to make up for anything. We can't change the past. All we can do is make the most of the time we have now. And that's enough." They sat together, the world around them slowly fading into the quiet of the night. Sarah knew their time together was short. She could feel the weight of it with every breath. But in that moment, she also knew that the time they had now, however brief, was enough. It was enough to bring closure to the questions that had lingered for so long. It was enough to begin rebuilding what had been broken. And it was enough to give them both the peace they had longed for. As they sat there, side by side, Sarah allowed herself to breathe deeply, to feel the warmth of the moment. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but they had time now, time to heal, time to understand, and time to love each other again. It wasn't the time she had once hoped for, but it was a gift nonetheless. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt at peace with that. A new beginning, despite the end. The evening was winding down, and the sound of music and laughter began to fade as guests filed out of the reception hall, leaving behind the faint clinking of glassware and the rustle of empty chairs being rearranged. But for Sarah and Lily, the celebration felt distant. The grand day, the one Sarah had poured her heart into, was nearing its end. But for them, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something neither of them had expected to find amid the wreckage of the past. They walked side by side through the vineyard, the moonlight casting long shadows on the ground beneath their feet. The air was cool, the breeze carrying the faint scent of the earth and the distant trees. Everything seemed surreal, as though time itself had slowed just for them to have this moment. Sarah's body ached, the toll of her illness leaving her weaker than she had ever been. But the truth had been told. The silence that had hung between them for so many years had been broken. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt a sense of peace. Lily's hand was warm in hers, and Sarah could feel the steady rhythm of her daughter's breath, the soft weight of her presence. She had missed this. She had missed her daughter. The moments they had spent apart, the years lost to anger and misunderstanding, now felt like a distant memory. It wasn't that the pain was gone, or that the time they had lost could be erased. But there was something else in its place, something that Sarah hadn't felt in years. It was the possibility of a new beginning. Do you think we can fix it?" Lily's voice was tentative, her words floating in the cool night air. It was a question that had lingered between them all night, a question that had no easy answer. But it was the first step in the journey ahead, the first sign that Lily was ready to face the past and the future with an open heart. Sarah smiled softly, her face illuminated by the moonlight as she looked at her daughter. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that was both sad and hopeful, a combination of the grief of the past and the promise of what could come next. "I think we've already started," Sarah replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We've come as far, Lily, and that's more than I ever thought we would have." The weight of Sarah's words hung in the air, but there was something in her tone that made Lily feel both relief and anxiety. It wasn't the assurance she had been hoping for, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that there was still time. Enough to remind her that it wasn't too late. They continued walking, their footsteps soft on the gravel path as they ventured farther from the reception. The night was quiet now, the bustle of the wedding fading behind them, leaving them in a bubble of shared space and shared understanding. There were no more guests, no more expectations, no more obligations. Just the two of them, at last, free to be themselves without the weight of the past hanging over their heads. Lily glanced at Sarah, her mother's frail figure walking beside her, a stark contrast to the woman she had known in her youth. Sarah's hair had turned silver, the softness of age now visible in her features. She was thinner, her skin tinged with the effects of her illness. But in that moment, there was a quiet strength in her presence, a strength that came not from her body, but from the wisdom and love she had accumulated over the years. Lily had always seen her as the strong, unbreakable figure in her life, but now she realized that strength didn't come from being perfect. It came from enduring, from surviving the worst, and from opening your heart when everything inside you wanted to close off. "I wish I could have known," Lily said softly, her voice catching in her throat. "I wish I hadn't been so angry, so blind for so long." Sarah turned to her daughter, her hand squeezing Lily's gently. "You couldn't have known, sweetheart, and you couldn't have understood. We were both victims in different ways. I couldn't protect you from him, and you couldn't see the truth." Lily nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "But now we have time to try at least." "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "We have time. It might not be much, but it's enough." The words hung between them like a promise. It wasn't the fairy tale ending either of them had once imagined. It wasn't the happy ever after that Lily had dreamed about growing up, but it was something else, something far more precious. It was the gift of time, the time to heal, to understand, and to reconnect after so many years apart. Lily glanced at her mother, a question lingering on her lips. How do we even begin? How do we make up for all the lost years? Sarah stopped walking for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. She took a deep breath, savoring the cool night air, before turning to face her daughter. "We begin by understanding that we can't make up for everything. Some things can't be fixed. But what we can do is start fresh. We can rebuild, one step at a time." Lily's heart ached as she took in her mother's words. She had spent so many years holding on to anger, blaming Sarah for leaving, blaming herself for believing the lies. But now, with the truth finally out in the open, she understood that neither of them could change the past. What mattered now was how they chose to move forward. What mattered was the possibility of a new beginning. "I'm scared," Lily admitted, her voice quiet but vulnerable. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to forgive everything and just move on." Sarah smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. "It's okay to be scared. I'm scared too. But we don't have to have all the answers. We just have to take it one day at a time, one step forward. And we do it together." They stood in silence for a moment, the night around them peaceful and still. Sarah's time was running out, but in that moment, it didn't matter. The time they had, no matter how brief, was enough. It was enough to say the things they had never said. It was enough to ask for forgiveness and to offer it in return. It was enough to begin rebuilding what had been lost, brick by brick, without the expectation of perfection. As they continued walking, Sarah felt a quiet peace settle over her. She had always imagined that healing would come with time, that it would come slowly, like the changing of seasons. But in this moment, with Lily by her side, she realized that healing wasn't just about time. It was about love. And even though they didn't have forever, the love they shared was enough to fill the space that had once been empty. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of hope. The future was uncertain, and there would be pain, no doubt. But there was also something new, a new chapter for both of them. And that was enough to carry them through whatever the future held. One of the most profound lessons that emerges from this story is the importance of truth, forgiveness, and the power of reconciliation, no matter how long it takes. Life often leads us down unexpected paths, filled with misunderstandings and hurt that may stretch over years or even decades. In our later years, we may come to realize that time is precious, and the weight of unresolved pain can hold us back from truly living in peace. Sarah's journey teaches us that it's never too late to seek healing, to share the truth, and to rebuild relationships, even when the road seems long and difficult. By embracing the truth, no matter how painful, and opening our hearts to forgiveness, we can begin to heal old wounds. The story also shows us that reconciliation doesn't need to be perfect, but it does need to start somewhere. The effort to reconnect with loved ones, to share our truths, and to listen with empathy can create a new beginning, even in the twilight of our lives. For those of us in our later years, this is a reminder that the time we have left is a gift, a chance to clear the air, mend relationships, and offer love without expectation. The ability to forgive and to be forgiven is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves and those we love. It may be a bittersweet process, but it is one that offers peace, closure, and the possibility of meaningful connections in the years we have left. Thank you for watching. If this video inspired you, please like and subscribe to Stories TH for more powerful stories of family reconciliation. Your support means the world to us.